let's bring in our pal, the one and only Ken Wiebe, on the program. Weber, how are you?
Lots happy Friday, my friend. Here to bring the joy level up a little bit in our fair province.
We're gonna talk soccer for the next half hour, or what?
Yes, indeed. Large effort on that front, but we're here to provide a little sober second thought, but also let's dig right into some of the issues. I mean, there are several of them right now for the Winnipeg Jets. There's no doubt about that, and there's no sugarcoating it.
No, there's not. There's no aspartame. There's no saccharin. There's not. It's a sour taste right now. I mean, just first off, thoughts on last night's game and what happened to the Jets in a game you and I both agreed that was as close to a must-win situation for Winnipeg Jets that you could possibly have in the first half of the regular season.
Yeah, I hate the terminology, to be quite frank, Huss. Unless a team needs to win in order to make the playoffs or to keep their season alive, I don't like the term. I know it is used quite loosely, if you will, but I also know why it's used. I mean, that was a got-to-have situation, as Michael Wilbon likes to say on PTI. I mean, hey, you're even with the team in the standings. The other team knows that the Jets had 3 games in hand, and they showed the urgency required to win that hockey game and win it handily. So for me, that was probably the thing that stood out the most. I mean, it was also, the buzzword for today is identity, and it is a fact. The Jets are searching for an identity, and they don't seem to know what they are. They're not an offensive juggernaut, despite having a lot of talent, as Mark Scheifele reinforced today. They're not a defensive stalwart grouping, even though their personnel has been upgraded. And as Brandon said, and as I wrote, Connor Hellebuyck is not playing the role of the human eraser, as my friend Sean Reynolds likes to say, to cover up a lot of those warts when it comes to the defensive deficiencies of the 5-man unit. Let me reiterate, this is not just a defense core problem. This is a 5-man unit issue that the Jets are struggling to work their way through. They're not able to outscore their mistakes, and they're not able to prevent enough of those mistakes from ending up in the back of the net. And then, for good measure, yesterday, a penalty-killing unit that has been 20% more efficient under Dave Lowry needs only 17 seconds to allow 2 goals that were, a pivotal time in the game.
Yeah, and the penalty kill had been a lot better. I mean, we talked with Mike Kelly, and he sort of dug into a bunch of the numbers. And, one of the things that had sort of turned around on both sides was special teams under Dave Lowry. Certainly wasn't the case last night. I mean, the lack of juice on the power play hurt them. And then, of course, that goal that went in right afterwards was just an absolute killer. What do you make of the emotional state of this team?
Yeah, it's interesting, Huss. We know that Blake Wheeler bristled at the term fragile, and he gave his reasons for that. And you understand why. I mean, let's be honest. The last thing a captain of any NHL team, we can in the media or in the fan, or for the folks in the fan base, can say you want honesty and everything else. But if the captain of the local hockey club is standing at a podium suggesting his team is fragile and they have no way out of this situation, people are jumping on top of Blake Wheeler saying, how could you say that? I mean, how could this be possible? I mean, and also, too, I don't believe that Blake Wheeler sees the Jets as fragile. That's not his nature. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He's emotional, but his emotional baseline is not panic. And it never has been, and I don't expect it will be ever, and nor should it be. I mean, that's part of leadership. I mean, do the Jets need to raise their emotional level, Huss? Back to your original point, yes, they do. Part of the problem for the Jets right now, and again, identity is a buzzword, but what we are not seeing from the Winnipeg Jets, they're not hard enough to play against. Dave Lowry has said he wants them to be hard to play against. He doesn't mean run other teams out of the rink, but they need to be harder to play against. And right now, they're making life far too easy on their opponent in terms of not using their speed enough, not finishing enough checks, and definitely not paying close enough attention to the detail in the defensive zone, in the neutral zone, puck management. I mean, Huss, where to start? They're not scoring enough. They're not defending well enough. They're not getting enough saves. last night's special teams were a problem, but other than that, things are going great right now, right? Right? I mean, it's just a tough time, and I mean, I understand the frustration, and you understand why, because the Jets had a 7-game losing streak at the end of last season that they were able to work their way through. But Huss, the thing that we heard from the coach and the players at that time is that they saw a pathway through that tough stretch, and they were playing better in terms of the way that was necessary to rack up victories. Right now, I don't know that we can say that we're seeing that, Huss, right? I mean, there are minute stretches in the game, but like you said, the ability for things to snowball against the Winnipeg Jets is very apparent right now. And I think that's why the term fragile was brought forward by Mike McIntyre in the post-game presser. And it is interesting. I mean, we've seen all kinds of, we're all searching for the psychology and, what are guys going to say? And, it started with Hellebuyck admitting there was pressure. And then as the week progressed, there was Kyle Connor saying some desperation was required. Urgency is a word that gets tossed out. But what comes after that? Is it rock bottom, or what comes after that in order to try to build your way out of that hole that the Jets find themselves in? It's a predicament. I mean, there are now 4 teams between them in that chase for a playoff spot. Oh, and guess what? The Chicago Blackhawks, a team that was supposed to be tanking, is 2 points behind the Winnipeg Jets right now. I mean, that is a precarious situation, if there ever was one, for a team that viewed itself as a contender going into this year. And right now, they've been nothing more than a bubble team, and a bubble team that is searching for answers. And they're not easily apparent right now, Huss. They're not easy to find.
Yeah, well, Ken, when you talk about the big situation with the Winnipeg Jets, it was always about Paul Maurice. Paul Maurice is gone.
Right.
Dave Lowry had a little bit of a bump. They didn't play. They had tons of time to practice. And now we've seen, essentially performances that were reminiscent of the period of play heading into the departure of Paul Maurice. So naturally, things go to the leaders. Blake Wheeler, I think, for my money, has been good. It's been a nice addition since he's come back from injury. The top line of Connor and Dubois and Perfetti has been consistent. And Mark Scheifele, for his part, actually has a few points lately, but at times has just frankly not looked engaged. I want to talk about Scheifele for a minute,
Sure.
but I think we've got this clip. I haven't heard it yet. This was from him meeting the media today, I guess, after the practice before the team headed to St. Louis. So, Reem, if you could, let's play that. Let's hear it, and then we'll discuss.
Year when you guys went through that similar losing streak, Paul had talked about you guys playing a defensive brand of hockey, and that was going to be the foundation you guys would build out from. What's the message this time around of how you guys, see the light at the end of the tunnel?
I think that's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out what our, what is our game plan, what is our strategy, and what we do great as a team. I think that's what we're struggling with right now, and it's something that needs to be figured out if we're going to turn this around.
Do you have an identity right now?
Probably not, no. Like I said 2 seconds ago, that's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out what what that is, and like I said before, it comes from within this room, and we got to figure it out in this group of guys. So we got to lean on each other. We got to stick together and keep fighting for that.
All right, so there's Mark Scheifele just in the past hour or so down at Canada Life Center after practice today. Listen, I appreciate the candor. I think he's right. I don't really think they have an answer. What did you make of what Scheifele has to say and just where he is in all this, being such an important player for the Winnipeg Jets, Ken?
Yeah, it was certainly interesting, and it's certainly the old spider senses were tingling in the ears. Certainly perked up when I was listening to Mark Scheifele, before I came on with you, Huss. Certainly interesting. Like you said, if he's speaking honestly. He knows that they need to find some answers. But earlier, I should also say too, Mark also leaned on the talent that the group has and things of that nature. But right now, they're just not executing. I don't think it's a game plan issue, and I don't think the Jets coaching staff is encouraging loose defensive zone coverage. I think that it's on the players to execute a little bit better. In my my personal view, in terms of Mark's play, obviously we look at a couple of gaping open nets and one-timers that sail high and wide, and people are going to say, well, hey, when Patrick Laine was here, that's an automatic goal or whatever else. And I mean, it's okay to say those things, but I mean, to me, Mark Scheifele looks like a guy who's gripping his stick right now. I think that he is not playing as confidently as we've seen in the past. Yes, he had a stretch where I think he had points in 8 of 9 games, and it was 8 of 10. Engagement level, I think, is an issue at times for Mark. I'm super fascinated, Huss. The big thing for me, again, the Jets can't afford to wait, and they need Mark Scheifele against the St. Louis Blues, especially with what's happening on the blue line and without Nikolai Ehlers. But Mark Scheifele is a guy who's expressed some frustration over the last couple of seasons in terms of how hard the pandemic has been on him, and he's not asking for sympathy. But what I'm very curious about, Huss, is how Mark Scheifele comes back out of the All-Star break, out of the time away from the game. And hey, I understand these guys had lots of time to practice. Mark's a guy who, put it quite far out there that he wanted to be in the Olympics. Not going to the Olympics would have been a disappointment for someone like him. I think that Mark has reached the point where he needs to get away from the game for a few days. And when he comes back, the Jets need him at his absolute best. They also need him at his absolute best on Saturday and Tuesday against the Flyers. But I mean, outside of Connor Hellebuck, Mark Scheifele has to be one of the most important and impactful players on the Winnipeg Jets roster in order for them to A, get out of it, and B, try to work themselves back into contention. And if that's not the case, I think you're asking an awful lot out of, Kyle Connor's had an exceptional season. We know that. Pierre-Luc Dubois is having a great season. Cole Perfetti's doing a nice job, and he's earned his way. Blake Wheeler's come back nicely, as you said. But Mark Scheifele just can't be a one-way player. That's not going to be good enough for the Winnipeg Jets. And I think that, he's a big part of this team, and he needs to be not only a strong voice, he needs to back up any words with actions. And, he should be the one trying to help the team get to that identity. Don't you know think?
What? Listen, 100%. I mean, listen, think about the Winnipeg Jets over the course of the last 10 years. When have they had their best success? And we can talk about the guys that were on the blue line. Mark Scheifele at times put the team on his back in that series against the Nashville Predators. I mean, he was the guy. I mean, that was the best we've ever seen him play. Yep. And listen, I still go back to that next season when the team was, second in the league, basically when we got into the New Year's, and then something went rotten. And, at times we've seen Scheif, glimpses of the old Mark Scheifele, but not enough, and certainly not consistently enough. And I'll go back to your point. I mean, I was incredibly high on the Jets' chances going in because I thought their roster was good enough, believed in the players. But Scheifele might have been the key, and you mentioned it, that Olympic carrot. I mean, and knowing what was going to be on the line for him in the first half of the season to try and make that team. And I mean, to be honest, anyone that watched the Winnipeg Jets through the first 30 games of the season when all that was in question, I don't think anyone was thinking that Mark Scheifele, essentially, if he was on the team, played himself off of the team right now. And, now Dave Lowry's come in. I don't think there's any doubt who the number one line is, and it's not Mark Scheifele's. And I don't know. I mean, how surprised are you that we haven't seen an answer at some point from him to raise his level of play? Because, through all of these challenges that I think I'll put myself in a hand up at the front of the line, thought that this would bring out the best in Mark Scheifele. It certainly hasn't done that. And some would say it's going the other way, despite the fact that, him showing up on the score sheet a little bit lately.
I couldn't agree more, Huss. I'm shocked that we haven't seen the best version of Mark Scheifele. I thought that Olympic carrot would be something that raised his level, not just saw a steadying of that level that was 5 consecutive seasons of a point per game player. I saw Mark Scheifele as being a guy who was going to find the best version of himself, potentially challenge that 100-point mark that is within reach when he is executing at that high level. But you're right. Mark Scheifele has been the second best center on the Winnipeg Jets this year. And it's by a fairly significant margin, Huss, right? I mean, that's the thing. If I had told you that Pierre-Luc Dubois was going to play at the level that he's played at, we wouldn't have thought there was any issue that the Winnipeg Jets would be
That was
in
the big
contention.
question coming in to the season. Oh, they've got all the pieces together, but okay, is Pierre-Luc Dubois going to have the bounce back season? Can he be that guy that rounds out that top six? Well, he's done all of that and more, and yet here we are.
Yeah, and that's why I say, I wonder if getting away from, I wonder if an unplug for Mark Scheifele will allow him to, just sort of decompress and come back refreshed, put some of those disappointments behind him and allow him to get locked in on the second half of the season. Because the other thing we know about Mark Scheifele, same as Connor Hellebuyck, he's a rhythm player. When he's feeling good, making plays, skating with power and grace, that's his combination. Really good, powerful skater, but he does it gracefully. He creates offense for himself. He creates it for his line mates. He can get into a groove. Right now, we haven't seen that groove as often as we're used to seeing. And, it's hurt the Jets. There's no other way around that. No one's pointing the finger at Mark Scheifele and saying he's the reason the Jets are where they're at. But he's going to have to be part of the solution, Huts, because the Jets don't have any other choice. He's the kind of player that can have a massive impact on the game. And I think he is going to have to take that responsibility upon himself. And if he's unable to do so, Huss, I know you took a lot of heat for this position earlier on this year from some folks. If that doesn't happen in the second half of the season, Mark Scheifele has to be one of the people that Kevin Cheveldayoff is considering when it comes to who's involved in the core and who's not.
Let's talk about that for a second, because again, when I brought that up in November, the team was struggling and it was sort of part of a bigger conversation that, listen, if you're hoping that Paul Maurice is getting fired tomorrow, guess what? That's not happening. So, from an organizational standpoint, what are the things that would make the biggest changes? And let's talk about assets and value of assets. And Mark Scheifele, with his contract, is incredibly valuable. Certainly when you look at his production over the course of it, at just over $6 million a year with 2 years left. And the concept was that if this season goes down the drain, next offseason, when they're looking at making significant changes, if we're not talking about coaching, you're looking to bring back Dubois. You've got Connor signed long-term. You've got Ehlers signed long-term. You've got Hellebuyck for a couple more years. Do you just wait it out? And I guess basically the bottom line was, I don't think Mark Scheifele is untouchable anymore, the way things are going and the way where we're at in the term of his contract. But I'll tell you what, and I just sort of said this to Brandon, Ken, and I never thought, this was never part of the original point, but to me, the way this team has played and what's happened with Paul Maurice leaving, to me, has sort of moved up that timeline. And I can't believe we're talking about it, because the thought of the Jets being out of it in February was, not anything that I ever considered. But if this doesn't turn around significantly through the month of February, and we're basically talking about a team that's not making the playoffs going into March, that conversation that Kevin Cheveldayoff would have had to have and think about in the offseason might come earlier. Because I'll tell you what, just speaking of the value of an asset, if you're already considering the fact that you might be wanting to make that move in the offseason, the fact that Mark Scheifele might be able to give a team 3 playoff years as well as 2 full seasons, increases the value of that asset as well. And if you're already playing for next season and you think that you're going to do that, maybe it's not so crazy to think that those sort of things could be talked about before the 21st of March. And I can't believe I'm saying it right now, but this is where the Winnipeg Jets are.
Yeah, Hassan. And the one thing, too, that I'm going to reiterate, in that when it comes to that potential position, I don't think for 1 second the Jets and Kevin Cheveldayoff are hanging up the for sale sign and Mark Scheifele is going to the highest bidder.
No, not now.
I think they want him to be a driver and be the leader that he has shown to be over the years. And they want him to help the Jets get things going this year. And when we talk about the window, we talk about Scheifele, Hellebuyck, Wheeler, and the guys that expire at the end of that, 3 years down the road. So I don't think that position has changed, but I do think that, you have to listen to what is out there. But I expect the Jets to give Mark Scheifele a chance to respond in the second half and to find a level that he has played at previously, and even find a higher level like we had talked about, because he's been a very valuable player for this team for an awfully long time. And the one thing, Huss, I always caution We know that how well that Dubois has played. The biggest issue when Mark Scheifele was working to take over the number one job at center ice from Brian Little, who provided great years of service, but everyone was always questioning whether he was a legit and bona fide number one center or not, is that they're extremely hard to find. So, I was talking with Dan Murphy yesterday about JT Miller. Well, everyone thinks that, JT Miller would be this great piece as part of the retooling. Well, Huss, as soon as you trade JT Miller, if you're Patrick Allvin, what are you looking for? You're looking for JT Miller. You're looking for a guy who's a point-a-game player over 163 games, is physical, plays on the power play, is a penalty killer, has a bit of a mean streak, and he can score. So, same with Mark Scheifele. That's a lot of offensive production to have to try and replace. And you mentioned the cap hit. To me, the cap hit is much easier to absorb in the off season for most contending teams, Huss. And I understand, I'm with you. A third playoff run would make him even more valuable. But a lot of those teams that are at the top of the food chain in the National Hockey League don't have room for a $6 million player. And because there's 2 more years at the end of the deal, the Jets aren't going to pay half the salary for Mark Scheifele to be moved out of town if they get to the point where they consider him in a deal. So to me, it seems like more of an off-season move. But Huss, like you said, if there's a team that thinks that Mark Scheifele is the answer, if they think that he can get back to the form that he showed when he had 14 goals in that Stanley Cup playoffs in 2018, let's see what the offers are. But to me, it's much more likely that if the Jets move to seller mode, they'll be looking at, what can you get for Andrew Kopp? What can you get for Paul Stastny? And sort of see from there. But the fact that the Jets have reached this situation where they're looking at potentially, if they have to make another kind of groundbreaking move to the core, that tells you what kind of desperation level where things are at, Huss, right? Everyone kind of anticipated Laine would be traded based on how the situation was. No one could have seen this coming, Huss. And anyone who says they did see it coming, I'm not sure you're buying what they're selling.
Well, no, I didn't see it coming. But as I said, I also saw Mark Scheifele having a monster season because of the opportunity to make the Olympics and everything that, was on the table for the club going forward. And that hasn't happened at all. Some would say at times that defensively, if it's possible, he's even regressed. And, and listen, let's just say that things don't improve and they don't go on. And I don't know anything that indicates to us that Mark Scheifele is going to take a week off for the All-Star break and come back as a different player and do the things we thought were going to happen when the Olympics were on the line at the beginning of the season. So if you get to the end of the year and you say, okay, the coaching stuff is done, we're going to figure out a new coach, but we figure something needs to be shaken up amongst this core that's been together. I don't think it's going to be Ehlers. I don't think it's going to be Connor. I'm pretty sure they want to sign Pierre-Luc Dubois. Cole Perfetti is a big part of the future going forward. Blake Wheeler, listen, Blake Wheeler's making $8.5 million at his age. That's a way more difficult contract to move. And if you do, doesn't bring back anything close to the haul that Scheifele will. To me, like if we're talking about a big core shakeup and franchise changing move, there's only one move, and it's Mark Scheifele. And again, I'm not saying this is going to happen now, but at the end of this year, if it ends the way it's looking like right now, which is ultimate disappointment, and, for a team that's spending to the cap, I don't know how you just say, you know what, we're going to give this group a mulligan and come back again. To me, all signs point to that being the most valuable asset to both bring back a return as well as significantly change the core and the leadership group that has been basically running this team through the majority of the Maurice era into Dave Lowry taking over as interim coach.
Right, Huss. And the other, the corollary to that is that the Jets are going to have to make a decision on the back end. Because of the emergence of some of the young players, right? All 6 of the regular 6 for the majority of this season have multiple years on their contracts, right? And we know there are guys pushing for work and, have taken some big strides. And there are some young guys that need to have that timeline kind of expedited as well. So they're going to also have a decision on the back end in terms of who they're sticking with and who they're moving out to make room for Dylan Sandberg and Ville Heinola and, whatever else happens from there on in. I don't want to try to stake over running the show, Huss, but let's get into Heinola right away. I know we know there was a lot of anticipation going into this week. We know it went poorly for him several shifts into the contest against the Florida Panthers. I thought he did a nice job of kind of, incrementally getting better maybe as the game went on, but that was not Ville Heinola's best game, nor was he expected to play at an optimal performance based on the time off that he had missed. What I liked about Heinola is that he was better in game 2 than he was in game 1. Were there still a couple of hiccups? Yes. Is it also possible that a lot of the folks that thought Ville Heinola should be playing 20 to 22 minutes a game were a little bit premature on their own timeline? That's all. Both things can be true. But what we know, Huss, is that this is a guy that has some skill. He's got a lot of talent. He still needs to work on his defending. But the only way to defend and get better at defending is by defending at the NHL level and kind of going through some of those young player mistakes. And we saw that on display this week. But like I said, I'm here to say Ville Heinola, nice job on the puck movement after some tough hiccups. And the cross-checking call on Paterson is an absolute, that's a ridiculous call. He barely touched him in front of the net. But overall, I think there are signs that he went from 10 minutes and change to 12 minutes and change yesterday. That's a step forward. For folks who did not know what happened at Jets practice today, Nathan Beaulieu will be out for the next 2 games at least. Josh Morrissey not expected to be back against the Blues. Neither is Dylan DeMello. That means Declan Chisholm, most likely, based on the pairings today, or Leon Gavanka will be in the lineup against the St. Louis Blues on Saturday afternoon. I believe Ville Heinola was with Neil Pionk, so that's going to lead to another increase in playing time. Now it's, again, another opportunity to showcase and, kind of see what he can do. Johnny Kovacevic, yes, there was a turnover. Yes, he made a great read and didn't get the regular kind of quality shot off that he probably would have if he had been playing at the American League or if he had a few extra games of NHL experience. But the fact that he was in the right position to make that play tells you all you need to know about Johnny Kovacevic, who's taken the scenic route, in his own words. I love that comment. It was great that his family was there to see him play. And I expect Kovacevic to be a guy that is battling to be in the mix for the third pairing or the 7th D-man job, both in the short term and over the long term, because of the skill set and the package that he has in terms of being a big, strong, physical guy that can move the puck, and do some of those other things where maybe probably help the penalty kill, clear the front of the net, all those types of things. But it's a great opportunity for Declan Chisholm. We know it's going to be a much more physical game than the one that he played in his debut. But man, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on some of these young guys to be performing because of the opportunity that is presented by COVID and injury right now.
Speaking of pressure, I want to ask you about Chevy. And I know you touched on this yesterday.
Yeah.
First of all, I mean, if you're a fly on the wall in Cheveldayoff's office right now, I mean, what are the conversations that he's having? And, to your point about the defense, I mean, I don't think for a second that they've given up on this season, and they shouldn't. I mean, there's still a lot of hockey left to be played. And I know they believe in the talent in that room, and it's not out of the question that he can get on a roll and at least be playing significant, meaningful games and stay in the hunt. But that being said, I mean, where they are right now, and you sort of laid it out, I mean, with the defensemen they have signed that, are in the lineup if they're playing, if you get to the point where you're wanting experience for these young players, I mean, you got to have a spot in the lineup for them. What do you make of Cheveldayoff's predicament right now? Not talking about the trade deadline, but really talking about the next 3 weeks with this season on the verge of flatlining.
Yeah, it's super interesting and fascinating, and any other adjective you want to describe it as, Huss. These are the tough conversations. It's easy to have the debate as a fan or even as a media member to say this is what the Jets should do. Well, guess what? There's no accountability. I'm not getting fired if I make the wrong choice, right, Huss? I mean, that's what it basically comes down to. When you're in a high-pressure job like Kevin Cheveldayoff is, when you've been around for 11 seasons and things aren't going well, you have to make sure that you don't make a panic move. As our friend Elliot Friedman likes to say, when a team is struggling, the other GMs are not throwing life preservers, they're throwing anvils. They're doing what they can to help sink your ship. They're not here to help you out, right? Nobody's gift-wrapped a goaltender for Kenny Holland to try to fix the Edmonton Oilers situation. So to me, man, these are tough choices. That's why, all the teams were holding their draft or scouting meetings, amateur side, pro side. I mean, things have gotten worse, I think, since those meetings were held for the Jets. They have to have some, real tough conversations about what direction they want to take. And, we always talk about the windows and try to predict where the Jets are in terms of their window. But here's what I also think is so important, and I think is maybe missed by some folks through no fault of their own, just through circumstances. Given the situation that we're in with the pandemic, with lost revenue, I understand some folks are saying sell the farm, try to get into the lottery and get, a Shane Wright this year or even next year. So I've even seen the suggestion that, tank for Connor Bedard. I'm sorry, Huss. In the economic situation that is found not only in Manitoba, but specifically in Manitoba, because that is where we live, I do not see any appetite whatsoever in the Jets considering a rebuild. Can they integrate some young players? Absolutely. They haven't had a single sellout this year as it is. You think fans are going to say sign up for a tank because they might get the first overall pick in one of the next 2 years? There's absolutely zero chance of that happening, nor should it be happening, whether it was empty buildings or not. The Winnipeg Jets have some nice pieces, but even if you get that lottery ticket, it doesn't always work out, right? Look what happened with the Arizona Coyotes. That year that they tanked, they were hoping for Connor McDavid, and that didn't quite work out so well, right? So to me, I don't see a rebuild. I see a retooling. Could they, speed up the process with some of the younger D-man? Yes, but the navigation of the next 2 months is critical, not only in the short term for the Winnipeg Jets, but also possibly in the long term in terms of Kevin Cheveldayoff and his ability to leave his mark on this organization, I believe.
Yeah. Listen, I'm with you. I mean, I know they're not just blowing it up and saying, well, this was a big year. Wow, what a disappointment. Everyone's gone. And it's easier said than done. I mean, how many trades have even been made in the National Hockey League this year? I mean, you don't just completely, switch it over in a couple of weeks. And, listen, this is obviously going to influence what happens at the deadline one way or the other. And, listen, it wouldn't be out of the question to see something happen, quickly to try to stop the bleeding and get some sort of injection into this team to change things up because of the way things are going right now. But I will tell you, this is absolutely condition critical. It already was going into that road trip where they needed to get some points. It didn't happen. These 2 home losses have just exacerbated the situation. Tell you what, this has been an awesome conversation, Kenny. I know you tweeted it out earlier, but if you missed yesterday's post game, a lot of great stuff with Sean and Ken. Check that out on their YouTube channel. And then, of course, you guys will be back at it tomorrow after the 2 p.m. matinee against the St. Louis Blues. Weber, thanks as always.
My pleasure. Have a great weekend, my friend. Take care.
All right,
enjoy the games.
You got it. There's Kenny Wiebe, and we are going to talk a little football with our man Lee Hacksaw Hamilton. But great Jets conversation. Thanks to everyone that's been commenting. Tons of people with us in the chat. If you wouldn't mind, hit that thumbs up button. And if you're new, you haven't been around, we're talking Jets and Winnipeg sports every day here on the program. Make sure you hit that red subscribe button and join us each and every day.